they would have me hold him and then they would sedate him in my arms. So it's tough to have that feeling of your child, going kind of unconscious and then having to give him over to the doctors.
Hi, I'm Kai Sorensen, Director of Podcasts at Balancing Life's Issues, and this is a very special episode of This Is Your Job Now. Wendy first connected me with Amy and Tony saying they have an incredible story that needs to be shared. What I didn't realize at the time was just how much of an impact their story would have on me, as the father of a little one. As they began to speak, I learned their youngest son, Vaughn, had been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer right in the middle of the pandemic. And the conversation roller coastered through the most intense emotions: fear, love, and doubt. So the following just isn't a story about illness. It's about what it means to care for the total individual: the patient, the parent, the partner, and the self. I'm so grateful to Amy and Tony for sharing their journey with us. Let's listen. Every year, about 1 in 285 children in the U.S. is diagnosed with cancer before the age of 20. Behind that number is a family, often struggling in silence. Amy and Tony's story is a reminder that when we care for someone navigating illness, we're not just caring for their physical health, we're caring for their whole emotional world. Their grief, fear, exhaustion, and hope.
So Vaughn started to have some swelling around his eye. It looked like typical pink eye. It was a little puffy. It was red. So I was doing virtual sessions with his pediatrician. We moved on to thinking maybe it's a bug bite. The swelling was slowly getting a little bit more pronounced. So huge shout out to our pediatrician for really taking our concerns seriously. In a few weeks, he wrote us a script to go to an ophthalmologist at the local children's hospital. We went to her, and I think she looked at him and I think she knew. She didn't say anything. She didn't cause any alarm. She just said, hey, it could be X, Y, or Z, but why don't we just get an MRI? We can rule it out. She encouraged us to stay at the hospital, to go ahead and just get that done and out of the way. Something didn't feel right. I didn't think it was possible for my healthy, happy 2-year-old who showed no other signs of any type of issues to have anything serious wrong with him. It wasn't really until the MRI happened and the oncologist came back in the room and she brought a social worker with her. I knew then that something was seriously wrong. We knew she was there to pick up the pieces.
When a parent hears the word stage 4 cancer, time stops. The trauma begins not with a treatment plan, but with uncertainty. As we listen to Amy and Tony, consider this. Care for the total individual is to recognize that trauma affects more than the patient. Parents, too, often carry PTSD symptoms, especially when they must face it all while physically isolated from support systems.
I'm not going to see them graduate. I'm not going to see him walk down the aisle. That's the first thing I thought of.
And this was double hit leukemia, lymphoma, stage 4.
Yeah, we kept getting worse and worse news. And she kept, insisting that we were going to be aggressive and we were going to fight this. And, she was going to do everything she could to make sure, he survived.
And it was aggressive. I think one of the difficult parts was, again, beginning of COVID, just a month into it. And the hospital was on pretty much lockdown. Like Amy and I could not even be, after getting the diagnosis, once he was going through treatment, we could not be in the same room with one another. There was one parent allowed in the room at a time. So we, could communicate via text and call.
Compartmentalization can help us survive immediate threats, but healing takes more. For Amy and Tony, caring for their own mental health meant intentionally creating time to feel, to write, to walk, to process. As you listen, think about what it means to care for yourself while caring for others.
Just being able to find ways to decompress where I could, whether that was through exercise, reaching out to friends, finding any way to laugh, focusing on those small moments of joy. We had a music therapist that would come in that Vaughn would love, and that would light up his face, and that would light up mine too, just seeing him with a little bit of relief in there. So I think in that survival mode, there is a sense of just trying to get through to the next day. And I think that's okay. It's okay to just get through to the next day, the next hour, the next minute, whatever helps you to get there. And that, again, is where in the moment it was like, compartmentalize this. I'm going to unpack it later. But just making sure there is that later, because when you don't go back to process it, that's where, really can impact your mental health significantly.
I didn't have the tool where I could, visualize something, put it on a shelf. I mean, that's not how my brain works. But I think the tool that got me through was my backpack. I brought a backpack filled with so many things to keep me busy in the hospital. I mean, there were times when Vaughn slept all day just on morphine. So he was in pain constantly, didn't get out of bed for multiple days. So I just packed things in my backpack, like a kettlebell, a yoga mat, journals. We had a little mini fridge, so healthy snacks, anything I could do. I would just put the backpack on and I would walk back and forth in this small hospital room, which ended up seeming like we were in prison. Most parents just kind of play on their phone and eat, and kind of started that way. But I quickly realized, like, if I don't take care of me, then how can I take care of him?
Nearly 1 in 4 parents of chronically ill children experiences clinical depression, but caregiving doesn't leave much room for self-care. Amy and Tony were forced to navigate this journey separately during COVID, each carrying their own emotional weight. Their resilience didn't just come from strength, it came from effort. Rituals like weekly check-ins became lifelines.
Finding any way to connect. Like Tony said, it felt like a separation. Oftentimes, there was only one parent that could even be admitted inpatient with Vaughn at a time. So there could be weeks where we wouldn't see each other in person. So it's texting and FaceTiming and just trying to create connection where possible and knowing this wouldn't last forever.
Yeah, I think it was probably the beginning of when you and I started, and we've done it since. Once a week, if not more, we put our planners together and we go through our entire week, and then we go through the month, and then we usually do extra 3 months. So, I mean, we had to be on the same page with one another during this time. That's all we did was planners together, FaceTime, call as much as possible. And for me, I was in such shock. Like, it wasn't denial. Not until I think he started losing his hair did everything really become real to me, because his hair was past his shoulders. He had really long surfer hair. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't even cry up until that point. I wanted to, I didn't know how. It was just in shock. I mean, I'm shaken just thinking back to that moment.
I think for me, there were definite moments. I mean, there were times where he didn't want to take any type of medicine. He didn't want to get hooked up to the IV. He didn't want to do something. And so there had to be nurses, and oftentimes either Tony or myself, that would have to restrain him. As a parent, that's the antithesis of what you want to do. You know, you want to do everything you can to protect your child and not hurt them or harm them. And it really felt like we were participating in something that was hurting him. He had to have a lot of spinal taps. So that was tough because they would have me hold him and then they would sedate him in my arms. So it's tough to have that feeling of your child, you know, going kind of unconscious and then having to give him over to the doctors. So those were moments where I felt like, what is going on? Again, everything felt so topsy-turvy. It was tough. It was tough to mentally have to cope with that.
Finishing treatment is not the same as finishing the journey. Amy and Tony share how post-treatment life came with new mental health challenges, especially for Vaughn. Caring for the total individual means recognizing that recovery is not just medical. It's emotional, psychological, and ongoing.
You know, we were kind of free and clear of that treatment piece of it. He has stayed in remission. So he's actually, again, 5 years from date of diagnosis. I think he's kind of on the cusp of being into survivorship, which is fantastic. So, I mean, really great news for his health. I think it really went from we're dealing with this immediate crisis of his health and eliminating the cancer and getting him physically healthy to then the impacts of all of that. So that was a big shift after we were discharged. And I think that's a big gap in terms of what was offered to us ongoing. They were kind of like, okay, you're good, you're off treatment, you know, come back in 3 months, we'll do blood work and scans, you know, and be able to check and make sure he's still doing good. But that emotional piece of it was missing from that.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when you hear the word remission, you know, you think it's just over. And his behaviors, you know, from being forced to do things in the hospital that he had no knowledge of or we could explain to him. So behavior has been a very difficult thing, but it's been a good road and we're really making progress.
I mean, it's definitely celebratory. And I say that because I think it's important to celebrate and to slow down and be able to acknowledge those wins, even if they're small wins, even if they're couched in some anxiety. Will he stay in remission? What are the health implications and side effects, you know, from the chemo and the treatment that he received? But I mean, I will say I did celebrate when he went into remission and celebrate every day, you know, that he's still, you know, free and clear.
Resilience doesn't grow in isolation. It grows through connection. Whether it was a neighbor delivering a meal or a friend sending a text, Amy and Tony's community became part of their healing. If we want to support the total individual, we must be the kind of people who stay.
There really is a lack of providers available, especially within the the child mental health space for a therapist, a psychiatrist, all those mental health professionals who truly understand what medical trauma looks like.
We tried right away getting them into therapy, and we quickly found that there's not many that can really understand trauma. Finally, after I think 4 therapists, we found an amazing one.
She's incredible. She's been with them for over 3 years now. I was looped into Momcology, which is a Facebook group or different groups dedicated to moms whose children have cancer. I do think they have a dad version of it too. But it's great. You're really paired with groups, maybe similar types of cancer, similar stages of treatment, resource sharing, really even just, being able to connect with others who understand what it's like going through this journey. And how isolating it can really feel at times from, those who haven't been through it. I even joined a book group through Momcology, and we read books that were specifically geared towards handling trauma, and talk about it together and how we can use that information in that book to help us in our lives. So that was really impactful. And then every year we've been doing something for Childhood Cancer Awareness Month, which is in September. And so joining with like Alex's Lemonade Stand, raising money for cancer research. I think childhood cancer prevalence rates are at about 1 in every 285 children will be diagnosed with cancer by the time they're 20. That's a lot of kids when you think about it. It's not as rare, I think, as people believe. And there's very limited funding into childhood cancer research and finding treatment that actually is suitable for children instead of just applying adult cancer treatment. So really pouring into that community and having some advocacy there has been really healing and helpful.
All my closest friends are out of state. So we talked on the phone a lot, FaceTime, but I think my biggest thing was I just wrote. I bought journals and I just started writing through things and reading and podcasts, just listening to podcast after podcast, just consuming as much positive, information as I could. And that's really what did it for me. I'm normally an extrovert, but I kind of saw the life of an introvert and just consumed as much as I could.
Resilience is not about bouncing back to the way things were. It's about growing forward with grace. Today, Vaughn is in remission, but the emotional journey continues. Amy and Tony teach us that resilience isn't discovered by accident. It's built intentionally through care, awareness, and support, especially in the quiet moments.
It's okay to survive day to day. It's okay to survive hour to hour. It is a storm. You are going through it. It's not always going to look, it's not always going to look great. There's going to be times where you feel despair and you feel the weight of it. You will get through that. Hold on to your resiliency, hold on to your hope, hold on to your support system. There is light at the end of the tunnel. And if you need to pull in additional supports to do that through therapy or other types of mental health resources, do that. Advocate for yourself.
I'd say continuing all the positive things that we had to learn going through this and moving forward, using all those positive things, like putting our planners together.
What has happened before and what has happened after, and after is forever changed. But just because that's true doesn't mean that that after piece has to be, worse than the before. You can really build up and learn so much and change your perspective and your outlook based on those storms that you walk through.
We often don't know what someone's carrying. That's why our job, yours, mine, all of ours, is to lead with care. Ask the extra question, make space for emotion, see the person beyond the role. Because the strongest teams, the ones that truly thrive, are those that care for the total individual. Until next time, I'm Kai Sorensen. This is Your Job Now. Thanks for listening to This Is Your Job Now, produced by me, Kai. If this episode made you think or made you feel, we hope it also made you realize you don't have to figure this out all alone. Leadership today is about presence, not perfection. To learn more, follow Wendy Woolner on LinkedIn, subscribe to Balancing Life's Issues on YouTube, or stream the podcast wherever you listen. Because if you're leading people, this is your job now. Anything else to add, Miles?
Yeah.